Hi, welcome back to LizCapism. I'm Liz, and this is my Made in Isolation series. It's a series of videos that I've been doing during the period of isolation that we're currently living through, where I talk about projects that I completed not on camera or that I completed partially on camera. This is a great opportunity for me to be able to do projects and still talk about them on the channel without necessarily requiring absolutely quality film content. I share a small apartment with my spouse and my dog, and it's not always the best quality in terms of where I can set up my camera or the noises that are going on in the house. As a result, sometimes the only way that I can talk to you about these projects is if I talk about them after the fact. I've already done a couple of videos in this series. You can check them out in the description below or in the card above. This is... Okay, well, first of all, this is my custom dress form that I just made from Bootstrap Patterns. She still needs a name, so please, in the comments below, let me know if you have any suggestions for names for this gal. But on this lovely custom dress form that I have made is the Walkaway Dress. Marika from Enchanted Rose Costumes suggested a sew-along and hosted a sew-along for the Walkaway Dress sometime in May, I think. It was a while ago, and I got all excited, got all fired up. I was gonna do it, and I did it. I think I completed it over the course of a week, which was really speedy for me, especially with a new pattern, especially one that I was having to alter as much as I did. But then I just left it. It had kind of been sitting, it had been waiting for a video to be made about it, and then CocoVid preparations started happening, and I got totally sidetracked by those. I am so pleased with how everything with CocoVid went, but I kind of missed making these videos, and I'm definitely never ever doing 4 videos in a single weekend ever again. That was so much work, but I'm super glad that I did it, and now I'm super glad to be back to normal. One of the ways that I'm back to normal is talking about my pattern struggles with this particular gal. The Walkaway Dress was called so because supposedly you could cut it out after breakfast and wear it to lunch. This is, of course, depending on the fact that when you make it, it fits the first time and you don't have to make a mock-up. So I feel like it's a bit optimistic. Definitely a sales pitch, definitely not reality as far as I've experienced. But that being said, let's start first with the pattern. The pattern that Marika and several other people following the sew-along were using, I think it was a Butterick pattern. I could be wrong. It'll be in a text box right here. I will let you know. I genuinely don't remember because that's not the pattern that I used. One that was freely available, the pattern that was offered during the Great British Sewing Bee. Marika talked a lot about adjusting the pattern for her particular measurements, and that turned out to be something that seemed consistent no matter who I talked to and no matter what pattern they were using, whether it was the Great British Sewing Bee pattern or whether it was the original pattern. It was weird because some of it was things that I was familiar with how to adjust, things like length and relative size. The pattern that I downloaded had a multitude of sizes that you could cut down for, and even after cutting down to the size, even one smaller than the one that I was supposed to be, it seemed really off, and it seemed like there was way too much in the skirt and way too much in the bust, and all of the proportions seemed very strange. Now, that being said, all bodies are different, but I had a really hard time understanding how a commercial pattern that's meant to be relatively easy to adjust for different body shapes, supposedly, could be so out of whack. So Marika explores it a little bit more. I'm definitely linking that video, so don't worry about it if you're really lost at this point. Originally, I was in hopes that I'd be able to make a slightly plain, wearable mock-up of this particular dress, but by the time I had done 2 or 3 different adjustments and at least one recutting of the mock-up, it became pretty clear that that fabric was just so totally done for. I had shredded it with all of the sewing and unpicking and sewing and unpicking. And so in the end, it ended up just being scrap fabric that I later used for my mock-up of the Herr Jolfsness dress. So a glass half full, I guess? Anyways, I did my best. I tried extremely hard to make this fit exactly the way I wanted to. In terms of adjusting the pattern, one of the more difficult parts of it was managing the bust darts and the waist darts. There are darts... Okay, maybe I should explain how this dress works first because it does confuse a lot of people. Excuse me, my dear. So this is the front of the dress, and it is a single piece of fabric that is actually pretty weird shapes. This is all one panel right here. The front down to the skirt and up to the shoulder straps. That front piece is all one big piece. Then you tie those big piece ends to each other in the back, or at least I tie them. You can also do hook and eye or clasps or any other kind of closure that you like. Then you end up with this back bodice piece, which is similarly shaped to the front, but a little bit less shaped in the bust area, and it doesn't go all the way to the skirt. This seam here is where the additional skirt panels go. And then that back piece gets brought to the front, and you clasp it at the waist. Once again, snaps, hooks and eyes, ties, anything that you like. So that is the basic layout of the walkaway dress. The reason that it's so confusing partially is because you do end up being very confused about what is the front and what is the back, because part of the front ties around to the back and part of the back ties around to the front. So you end up in a kind of halfway point where you're not sure at times what part of the garment you're adjusting, and you keep having to sort of do the mini 3D model in your head or with a sheet of paper to try and figure it out. So that was complicated. But also the strangeness of the shape and the inconsistency, it seemed, of the shape to various body types meant that the bust especially, but also the front darts that are in the front part of the dress became very complicated. It seemed like this pattern wasn't very friendly to varying ratios in bust, waist, and hip size. Made it very difficult, and you can even see I did not fully succeed with the bust darts. The bust darts were either way too big or way too broad, or in the very odd places, and unfortunately my lack of experience meant that I couldn't do a very good job of adjusting it, even with the recommendations for Marika and others about how to do bust adjustments. I just couldn't figure it out. So what I ended up with, unfortunately, is bust darts that are a little bit higher than my actual bust line. In theory, bust darts should go from about the middle of your bust and end about an inch above the sort of apex of the highest point of your bust. That's not what happened here. This is at least 2 inches higher, and it's not quite far enough in. So what I ended up with was this little bit of gape here that I should probably, in theory, get another bust dart in there, but not being experienced enough with sewing darts at the time, and certainly even now, I probably wouldn't be wholly comfortable with it. I feel like what I would end up doing is just making it look super wonky in the bust area, and I would rather have a little bit of gape there than I would drawing more attention to poor sewing in the bust area. I feel like of those two, the trade-off to me in having to wear a camisole underneath is a much lesser evil than having very obvious poor sewing at my bust level. Maybe that's just me. The other issue that I fell in with pretty quickly was my inexperience with bias binding. Most of the garments that I have made so far in my life have been either bagged out or hand-lined or felled or what have you, and so finishing seams with bias binding is not something that I'd ever really done, which I realize now is kind of strange. I feel like I probably should have learned or known by now, but I genuinely hadn't. So, I know, again, this is May. I have bound a whole lot of stuff with bias binding since. I decided to go with a contrasting bias binding, and while I think that visually it turned out to look really great as a result, it does mean that any time I screwed up or made any kind of change that made it a little bit off, it is super visible. One of the ways that it is incredibly visible is the fact that, especially at the bottom, I ran out of the bias tape that I was using and found the only other green bias tape that I had, which was much wider and actually had a gradient of color. I don't know if that's, oh yeah, there you go. You can see that seam right there is when it switches from one side of the gradient to the other. And I didn't pay that much attention, honestly, nor did I care. I kind of just wanted it to be done. But this is the kind of thing that maybe if I was making it for somebody else, or if I wanted to make it really nice, I would probably spend a little bit more time and energy making that look good. So I learned a lot about bias binding. I learned that, for instance, it needs to be finished in the right way, and if you don't finish it in the right way, it's going to be really, really obvious. So a couple of examples on this particular deer, up on this shoulder seam, as well as on the front fastenings, I did not finish it well enough in the corners, and now it's all frayed edges. I also kind of screwed up a little bit here with the bias binding, so it started to pull away when I attached the clasps, which I'll get to in a second. And unfortunately what that means is that the front and center of the dress doesn't look 100% great. Again, I was making it for me, I was making it quickly, and I didn't actually do the fasteners on the mock-up because I don't have that many, and I wanted to save them for the good stuff. I ended up paying for that because they don't look spectacular. So one last thing, I would probably, if I were to make this again, make the sleeves, the shoulder straps, a little bit narrower. They do chafe a little bit here, and I'm finding that I think that that's something that's pretty common with me with patterns, is whether it's taking them wider or taking them narrower, shoulder size for garments seems to be something that's really important to my comfort. Oof, all right. The light is changing outside, which is making the camera settings that I've set look super weird, so I'm sorry if halfway through this video the light has changed dramatically, so we'll see if we can get through the rest of this video and have it be fine. Okay, so last thing, the clasps. The clasps are these adorable little bejeweled, not bejeweled, but like little, they're snaps, actually. I think they're called snaps. And they do the snappy thing. You snap together. This is the most important takeaway. Learn how to apply these to your garments properly. What I should have done is get the proper applicator. The applicator is a super important part of adding fasteners, whether that's grommets, whether that's zippers, really anything. It is really important that you have the proper tools. I didn't have the proper tools, so what I ended up doing is trying to jerry-rig what I had to make it work, and that resulted in in fact, the top button getting cracked in this beautiful little plastic bit here. People on the street aren't going to notice. People walking by aren't going to notice. My mom didn't notice, which, I mean, all credit to moms, they don't tend to. But I notice, and I care, and it bothers me, and I feel like that's one of the things that I would really genuinely change if I went back and redid any of this dress, is those stupid snaps. Learn to do them properly, and on top of that, do them properly a couple of times before you do it on the final garment. I need to stop skipping steps. This is an old song again. I need to stop skipping steps during the mock-up phase. The mock-up phase is meant to be a place where you can learn and figure out these techniques, not to ruin the final garment. At this point, I've learned my lesson largely now, but back in May, I still hadn't learned my lesson, and I was just using the mock-up for fit and nothing else, which is only one of the many reasons that you should make a mock-up. I'm really proud of the selection of this fabric. This is an old story for me, but this is fabric that I inherited. I basically don't buy fabric new. This is just something that you'll learn as you go through. I don't remember the last time I bought fabric new. I buy fabric at antique stores, I buy fabric at estate sales, and I buy fabric from places like Value Village, or I buy bed sheets from Value Village or other large thrift stores. Assume, unless I say otherwise, that the fabric that I'm using is stash fabric. That being said, I was so pleased when seeing the Walkaway dress. I went into my stash and saw something like this. I feel like the polka dots and the sort of taupey brown color with the white made it a very 50s look, very 50s feel. It's a light fabric. I think it's silk, and that just made the whole thing feel a little bit more luxurious, a little bit fancier. So that really felt good to be able to make something that is really cool looking out of a really nice material that I feel went really nicely with the time and the sort of theme of this like elegant, light lunchtime dress. Because as much as I'm slagging it off and as much as I'm complaining about all of the things I did wrong, I feel like this dress actually is one of my favorites that I've ever made. I love the look of it, and despite its flaws, it does wear really nicely. It makes me feel so swishy and so positively special. This is what I'm really after when it comes to the kinds of clothes that I'm making. I really want to have a wardrobe that makes me feel good, and making my own clothes has been a really great way of doing that, where I not only feel good in the clothes that I'm wearing, but I have that pride of having made it myself and understanding that any faults that it has are of my own doing. And even though that sounds like it's a bit of a negative statement, it's actually really positive. The control that I have over my clothing gives me a sense of real pride and agency, and I just love that. This was kind of an impulsive project for me. It wasn't something that I'd always wanted to do. I hadn't even heard of it until Marika talked about it in her video. I felt like I just needed to seize the moment and do a fun thing, and it being promised to be a fast make, I think was encouraging, and the fact that even with all the fiddling and the faffing, it did turn out to be a fairly fast project, I think speaks well to it as the kind of project that is fun and silly, and if you screw up, it's not that bad, but at the same time, it yields this really, really cool result. It's a cool dress. It's nice looking. I'm sorry. Have I offended you? Thank you very much for coming along to this third entry into our Made in Isolation series. And I want to give a particular shout out to all of the people who are new here since COVID. I'm running out of battery, so I'm going to try and say this fast. Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for subscribing. COVID was an amazing weekend, and I hope that we can do more amazing projects as a community and as individual channels in the future. And if you like this video, please subscribe and buy me a coffee if you'd like to support me more. There's a link in the description. I really am thankful for all of you new people, as well as the people who have been here since the very beginning. You are all part of my wonderful sewing family. Thank you so much. If I have anything else that I'm going to say, I'm going to put it in the voiceover because my battery is so angry. It is flashing in the monitor off screen and I can't look at it anymore. So I'm going to say bye. Thank you very much and have a really, really great next couple of weeks. I will see you again the Monday after next. Bye.
Okay, on you go, Missy.